everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this Pulaski County Historical Society meeting. I would like to encourage anyone who is not already a member of the Society to become one. We have a Facebook page and a website at PulaskiCountyHistory.org where you can get information on how to join. Our presenter today is Laura Fuentes, who will be speaking about Belmont, a lost boomtown in North Little Rock, which was a center for entertainment for World War I soldiers training at Camp Pike. She will present her previous research and future work being done to preserve this part of Arkansas history. Laura is listed on the Register of Professional Archaeologists and works as a lab manager and report specialist at Flat Earth Archeology in Cabot, Arkansas. She earned her master's in public history from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock in 2020 and has experience in boomtown research, archival and genealogy research, and cultural resources management. If you have any questions during the lecture, please let us know by using the chat box. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can before the lecture ends at 3:30. I'll now turn things over to Laura.
Thanks, Shannon. So, good afternoon. Thanks to everybody that took time out of this really pretty Saturday, no, it's Sunday, to come and listen to this. And let's see, here we go. There we go. Okay, so I think I was going to introduce myself to people that aren't familiar with me personally. Some of the audience I know, but I know a lot of you guys I've never had the pleasure of meeting. Like Shannon said, I'm an archaeologist. I work out at Flat Earth Archeology. I'm the lab manager. I graduated in 2020 with a master's in public history from Euler here in Little Rock, and I specialize in post-contact archaeology or historical archaeology and historic preservation. Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar with St. Joseph's Center of Arkansas or Belmont, or Camp Pike in particular, I'll go ahead and give you guys a brief history of it. The map that we're looking at is a map of the location of the city of Belmont. And it butts right up to modern day Camp Robinson. The story of Belmont, Arkansas is interwoven with the history of the Catholic-owned St. Joseph's Orphanage and the World War I Army Training Center, Camp Pike. The building has been in continual use since its occupation and since it opened 111 years ago. Currently, the St. Joseph's Center of Arkansas leases the building and the land from the Catholic Diocese, and it operates as a nonprofit promoting local sustainable foodways, local artists, and it works with other organizations such as Job Corps. The orphanage started in 1908 as a social works project of Bishop John Morris, and it operated through the late 1970s. Some of the children were taken in by the Bishop, Morris, and the nuns as early as 1908, and they were housed in pre-existing houses on the property until 1910 when the main building was finished. The main building is a 56,000 square foot Italianate villa structure. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in the 70s, and originally the footprint of the property that Bishop Morris owned was about 720 acres. Right now it's sitting at about 60. So with the U.S. entering the First World War in 1917, a new Army Training Center camp and cantonment were awarded to the Little Rock Board of Commerce. Camp Pike is located in North Little Rock, and at that time it was an enormous economic opportunity for the local community. A group of Arkansas men formed the Belmont Development Company shortly after. In 1917, the building was leased by the War Department, the orphanage building that is, and it was used as a hotel for incoming soldiers' friends and families. The military department leased 320 of the 720 acres owned by Bishop Morris. The Belmont Development Company quickly set about leasing lots to local businesses. Following social pushes for more reform control in the 1910s and 20s, especially in relationship to military posts, Belmont was designed to provide troops with a clean, safe, and moral entertainment for troops. In less than 15 years, more than 30 businesses are known to have operated within Belmont. Cafes, pool halls, movie theaters, photo studios, and places to shop are just a few of the main attractions. Unfortunately, the exact fate of the buildings is still undetermined. The rate of decline or the combination of factors that prompted the end of Belmont can only be guessed at. I haven't found any primary evidence yet that would give me any explanation or definitive reason as to the specific decline of Belmont. Archives provided an avenue to learn more about the history of both the businesses and the men behind them. Newspaper ads, Public notices, tax records, real estate records, transfers, and historical images and maps contain some of the only characteristics and details of them for Belmont. Because of the restrictions set in place during the COVID-19 pandemic, several repositories were unable to provide access to known and primary sources. So my research is about trying to advance and understand how historians and archaeologists can investigate short-lived physical portions of the built landscape. When I drive through rural parts of Arkansas or backcountry roads and I see a building that's kind of just melting into the woods, I always want to know about the history of the people that built it and the history of how something so important as a house or a church or a shop can get to the point where people either don't want to care for it or they're not able to care for it. The City of Belmont and North Little Rock provided a perfect chance for me to develop and test out some approaches for professionals and amateurs to dig into the stories and histories of places like this. So I started looking at archival and other forms of written documentation of the city to see what was already known and what had been published about it. Long story short, there's not a whole lot on the written record or in local history books about Belmont. I worked on an excavation once with an archaeologist named Dr. Crystal Lewis from the University of Arkansas in Little Rock. We used GIS and LiDAR to map and look at the changes in elevation of our excavation site. With the Belmont site, excavation wasn't a feasible option due to time and budget constraints. So using the same tools felt like a really good way to start to interpret the landscape. I wanted to know what, if any, marks or evidence remained of Belmont. One of the most important parts of this research and project for me was creating something in the end that would be useful and accessible to the public. I created a website for the St. Joseph Center of Arkansas to use and to take over that explains the history of Belmont and how it relates to their property and other aspects of local, state, and national history. During the course of my research, I looked at over 35 archives trying to find any trace of Belmont. Some of the more interesting details that I found include the instance of a murder mystery, specific bands, the names of plays and movies that were shown, performances that happened in Belmont, and menus for either the weekly Sunday dinner or specific, holiday events and celebrations that happened at the hotel. Newspaper advertisements gave the name of businesses, social events such as the dances and stuff, and of prominent officers' families that came to visit at Belmont. So here's a few examples of some of the archival material that I was pulling up. At the bottom, the rail train cars are from the Missouri Pacific Rail line that had a line that went into Camp Pike, and it also had a depot or station that would stop directly behind the Hotel Belmont and let passengers off. Looking at the top images, moving from left to right, the first one is a piece of paper concerning a property transfer between an individual and the military department. And then we have a picture of some young troops that was taken at one of Camp Pike's many photo booths. It was really popular during the time for young men to take pictures in their uniforms and either very serious or very silly poses and send them back to friends and family in the form of souvenirs. The image of the man next to that is Peter Stavaros. He was the night manager at a Belmont shop who was beaten to death one night in his bed, and it was written about for a couple weeks in the local newspapers, and I don't think they ever did figure out what happened. And the last one is a picture of the cavalry review or presentation on Camp Pike, and in the background you can actually see the Hotel Belmont sitting on the hill. Okay, so I know not everybody is familiar with some of the more technical terms in this presentation, so I thought I'd break it down a little bit. GIS, or Geographical Information Systems, is a way that we look at the landscape and map it. So it offers a way for me to interpret and display various facets of the landscape. I use it primarily as a tool to display the changes in elevation and create maps for the project area. LiDAR is a tool that uses radar deployed from an aircraft, and it creates three-dimensional models of the landscape. The data was used to create digital elevation models that displayed abnormalities on the surface, and these abnormalities would indicate or suggest things like building foundations, old roadways, or other forms of disturbance or human activity. And These two pictures is actually the project area, and it's being displayed using that LiDAR data. So the bright reds, the oranges, and the yellows are the higher elevations, and then as it transitions to the cooler greens and blues, you start going down in elevation. And switching it to contour lines, it allows me to display the shape of the ground in greater detail, showing smaller increments. The green portion is the project area that I was looking at, and the rest of it, the boxes on the kind of left side of the screen, is actual modern day Camp Robinson. So if you zoom in, you can get an idea of the kind of image that I was looking at and trying to pull out details of. So these are topographic lines, so they display the elevation changes, similar to what you'd see on a road map. You can see how modern fences, the rail lines, roadways, and buildings and ponds start to pop up out of the landscape. So combining the LiDAR information and previous archaeological monitoring surveys conducted by the Natural Resources Conservation Service, I drafted a grid over the project area that I've selected, and I picked units or specific areas for ground truthing. The active field verification of LiDAR is an important step in the archaeological practice, and it is used to verify the existence of features and to determine their qualities. I settled on a random selection of units in both LiDAR frames, coming up with 3 in each, or 6 total. Each survey unit was 30 meters by 30 meters. Of those 6 units, 2 were on private property in the eastern half of the grounds, and 1 was underneath a modern paved road. 8 additional units were selected based on previous indications that they might contain something significant to the research. None of the randomly selected units contained any surface traces of material culture, and all of the ones that I selected judgmentally did. None of the artifacts that were observed were collected at the time of the fieldwork. All the materials that were observed, they were either building materials in the form of bricks, mortar, concrete, or ceramics or glass, which are typically associated with a commercial use. So things like soda bottles or the really heavy whitewares that you see in hotel and service industry. And this is a map showing you the entire project area and with a grid that was placed over it, along with the little purple units, which are the survey units that I worked in. And here's some pictures of what it actually looked like when I went out. So the image on the left is a large concrete foundation. And that little yellow thing that you're going to see in the pictures is a pre-made 1 by 1 meter square grid. So I would kind of plot that down, and I would use that to count the artifacts in different areas. The photo on the right, it's actually a mix of native stone and concrete. And based on the location and some of the images and information that we have, I kind of think that it's associated with the Pfeiffer's department store that was located in Belmont. The image on the left here shows a ditch on the far west half of the property. You can kind of see some of the white color up front. That's a concentration of white stones and gravel. We think that it's probably more than likely remnant of the pathway that was leading up to the pool halls, which would have been on the other side of the ditch. The middle picture is a clay terracotta pipe, which should have been associated with, I'm hoping, the water lines or the sewer lines in Belmont. And then the picture on the far right is a concrete pier that was associated with one of the unknown buildings that belonged to businesses in Belmont. So this map is actually the kind of white fuzzy part is the only map that I have ever seen of the layout of the city of Belmont. And I took that and I kind of laid it over modern day aerial imagery of the area. And I matched up the roadways, so I matched it with the previous rail line to the north, and then Cato Road to the south. And the roads match up, and you can also use that to, I used it to check with the LiDAR, and the roadways for the most part in the areas that are not being used currently by farms, like for the farm stand for the cows and the pastures and stuff, you can still see them on the LiDAR. So we still have traces of the old roads on the far east side of the property. And in addition, the little different colored blobs that you see on the map, the purple, the orange, and the blues, those are the potential location of buildings. And the different colors indicate indicate the level of certainty that I have at the moment about them. So Belmont really does kind of excite me, and I wanted to get other people excited about it also. So I decided to use this chance in my research to create something that the general public can use to learn about North Little Rock's history and to explore this little-known boomtown. I used the website creation platform Wix, as it allowed for a high degree of creation and integration of different elements. And I focused on creating an easy-to-use and understand introduction to the city and the current and future research possibilities. The site's in the last stages of final editing, and fingers crossed, hoping that it should be published and publicized later on this month. So moving forward, or where we're at today, the building and grounds have survived for 111 years, since 1908 when they first started breaking ground. It may not continue to survive the way it is if people and members of the public don't act to ensure that it's protected in the future and that the historic landscape and site continue to be preserved in the way they are. In March, a short survey was done to document suspected features on the southeast portion of the property. We found intact artifacts and materials potentially dating back to Belmont and traces of the historic road installed during the Belmont area. The field work was done to document and to help support an argument against the installation of a new portion of highway that's actually, as it's planned or proposed, it would cut through the eastern side of the property. And depending on one of two routes that they're looking at, it would take out as much as 7 to possibly 15 acres of the site. If anybody is interested, the period for public comment on the proposed road, I think it's closed, but you're more than welcome to contact any one of these people and let them know that, you don't think that the road is a good idea, which the board doesn't really appreciate. The St. Joseph Center board doesn't appreciate the road, and we're taking this and other measures to hopefully prevent it actually going in. Here's a few images of the type of materials that we were finding on the eastern half of the property. The picture on the left is an uncapped open privy, and we're not entirely sure what building it's associated with or when it was installed. The picture on the right side of the screen is a piece of architectural brick. Picture on the left here is it's a really large chunk of concrete, and I'm not sure what it was part of, either a fence line or a building, but it's interesting because you can actually see there's spoons that have been mixed into the mortar. And then the picture on the right is another terracotta pipe fragment, a little chunk laying there in the ground. We've got probably the most exciting thing we found that day. It's a piece of amethyst glass, and the picture on the left, you can see it laying next to some rather large rocks, and the picture on the right is a close-up of the little purple bottleneck. So overall, background research showed that Belmont really is an understudied part of North Little Rock history and Arkansas history, and then it provides a unique case study for Boomtown scholarship. When I was researching what other people have done with boomtowns, this one is, it's really an outlier. There's boomtowns in the West, the gold rush, and there's boomtowns for oil, there's boomtowns for mining, there's boomtowns built up around military bases, but not specifically for entertainment purposes. Belmont's kind of a weird thing in that it didn't necessarily develop around a resource. It was mainly, they called it Little Rock's Coney Island. It was there to entertain and make sure that the troops weren't getting into trouble and that they had someplace safe and chaperoned which they could meet their friends and family at. It's useful as a contemporary archaeological site as it can show the limits and balances and that tool set that we typically rely on. And I know that historians and archaeologists and geologists like to stick to things that are familiar, but one of the things that this study tried to do was kind of see what happens when you start pulling in other pieces of research methods or tools from other fields. Excuse me. Let's see. The surface artifact scatters and features that I did find ended up corresponding with known building locations in Belmont. Unfortunately, no new features or foundations were uncovered using the LiDAR, but even though nothing was found, it doesn't mean that it might not be useful for somebody else's site or research project. And most importantly, all this information is going to be publicly available and accessible as a virtual exhibit. Like most projects of this size and length, I wasn't able to do as much as I wanted to or to the degree that I would have liked to. COVID-19 complicated it and it limited it to a degree, but it also forced me to adapt and find other ways to get around those limitations. Out of everything I did, I really did set out in this project to try to understand how exactly the city just disappeared and what, if anything, historians or archaeologists or geologists can do or to study them. Belmont's been only gone for a little more than 100 years. How did North Little Rock and Little Rock just forget it that fast? Can something that was there, that had a built and tangible aspect to the landscape, can it really just disappear that fast into nothing? And I don't know that this project answered that or that I personally have the power to answer any of those questions or all of them. I was able to fill in a good chunk of Belmont's general history in a way that hasn't been done before. And I was able to create a map which relocates some of those places on the landscape. Also, my research is one of the first academic investigations into Belmont that's really just focused on it. And I'm hoping that with this talk and with the thesis work that I did on it and the website, that it's going to spark further interest in research into the city. So I hope I didn't talk too fast, and I know my throat's kind of sore, but thank you for your time and attention. And I hope you found the topic as interesting as I have, especially while I was researching it. If you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer them. If I don't know something, I will look into it and I will do my best and I'll try and get back to you with it. But that's all I've got for now.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'll wait a little bit to see if anybody has questions in the chat. While we're waiting, I have a question. What was the most exciting discovery you made while researching Belmont, whether that be an artifact or a document?
I think right now the thing that I'm still most excited about is the Catholic diocese. They have a chunk of material that I've not seen, and God bless their souls, but I think they have one person that works there like one day a week as a volunteer, as the archivist. So he's been trying to scan it and get it to me, but it's taken several months. And he said that there's a lot of materials relating to that time. What they are, I don't know, but it would be really, I'm hoping that there's information about specific businesses and where they were at. But that's the thing that I'm most excited about still at the moment. That and a physical artifact would probably have to be the hotel key that was on the main image on the first slide. Let me see. It's the only physical artifact that I have ever seen that relates directly to the Hotel Belmont, and the St. Joseph Center actually has that key in a little display box. So if you go out to the orphanage, they have a really nice little farm stand. You can request a building tour. If anybody's there at the time, they can do it, and you can actually go and see the little hotel room key.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Linda. Are there any cemeteries or grave sites in the Belmont area?
Not that we know of. We haven't found anything, and we haven't seen anything that would suggest that there are. There were houses on the property before Bishop Morris bought it. So there's the potential that, you know, as people did back then, just like the random average burial of somebody associated with a house, an old house place in the country, but I doubt it.
I'm gonna wait a minute or two more just to make sure there aren't additional questions. How did you first become interested in Belmont?
I'm trying to go back and remember when I first heard about it. I can't remember exactly, honestly, at the moment. I think it was introduced to the orphanage beforehand, and one of the board members recruited some of us through the Arkansas Archaeological Society's chapter here in Little Rock to come and do some work with some of the materials that they had. So it might have been that, but I'm not entirely sure. It all kind of blurs together. I've been looking at it so long.
All right, it looks like we don't have any questions coming in. So thank you so much, Laura, for taking your time to speak with us today. So thank you everyone else for attending, and I hope you have a great afternoon.